Meet Brent Musburger. He's the host for the CBS Sports Spectacular. And there's another gentleman included in this interview today, my husband. We thought it would be interesting to pull him in, Lenny Lyles, who used to play professional football. You're welcome. For 12 years to help me interview Brent. Brent, I have admired.
I want to ask you one thing.
Go ahead.
Leonard had better hands around the house when he's dealing with the pots and pans than he did on the football.
Oh, he outlived that, or he just changed his position altogether there. And
no, let me tell you, Brent, I'm pretty good. I think I can cook certain meals better than she can. And I'm a pretty good dishwasher, so I do a pretty good job around the house. You'd be surprised.
Well, now that you're out of football, is she bringing the big check home?
Hey, well, I don't know about that.
Really, I admire guys in your field because it does take a lot of knowledge in so many different sports. How long does it really take to become confident in yourself and your ability to do it all?
I don't know if you're ever completely confident in yourself. I suppose you always start with a passion about sports. And the easy thing about television really is that the picture tells so much of the story. And the most difficult part about my job is, because I'm a motor mouth, is just keeping my mouth shut and letting the picture describe it. You know, when Leonard was back there knocking down a pass that Bill Wade was throwing for Johnny Morris, everybody knows out there. What was number 43? He's got his hands on that ball back there knocking.
Well, the main thing then is to know the names, isn't it? And of course the numbers on the uniforms.
And that's the interesting thing. When I'm
helps.
driving around Chicago and I'm getting ready to do a football game or something, I have rosters with rundowns, and I'll memorize the numbers.
On the way.
19 Unitas, 20 Boyd, you know, and so on.
I'm surprised you remember 43, you know.
Listen, I can remember a lot of receivers beating you deep and long.
Thank you.
See there?
Well, you know, I have a question I'd like to ask, since we are sitting here talking. I wonder, generally, how well does athletes fare as a sportscaster or announcer or something? I know a lot of the guys go into that, and I was asked several times, why didn't I get involved in it? But I noticed when you get near a camera or things like that, I get a little nervous. And I was wondering, generally, how do they seem to pan out?
Lenny, you can't generalize about it. There are some athletes who seem to be naturals for the broadcast booth. Don Meredith, his personality fit in well with the abrasiveness of Howard Cosell, so he's been successful. Others never relax, despite the fact that they were great athletes. They're very conscious about the fact that the camera is rolling while they're talking, or that the action on down the field, and they don't describe it really as well as they play the game. I'm all for any athlete who becomes a competent broadcaster moving into that booth, but I resent any athlete who is hired simply because he comes off a field and he has a name value, and they will throw him in there right away.
Cold.
Now, I happen to believe that Keith Jackson is a much better play-by-play man than Frank Gifford, and that ABC made a mistake when they made that switch on Monday night, and they did it simply because Frank Gifford had a great name.
Well, you know, I've often tried to tell fans that, because they say, why don't you go into sportscasting? Why don't you coach? Just because you play, sometimes that doesn't mean you're going to be a great coach. And I think sometimes it's hard for fans to understand that. And so often they will force or push an athlete into getting into something that he probably really can't handle. So I have to agree with you on that.
I would think with coaching, Lenny, didn't you find that the best ones were those who had the ability to communicate to you and could discuss things maybe other than football, and you felt a little deeper about them rather than just having some taskmaster out there with a whip?
I would have to agree to that, because coaching is communicating and understanding personnel. And I think a lot of top athletes can't do that well because they're so professional in what they do. They have a difficult time understanding why you can't do it compared to a guy who can really get through to you in terms of what should be done on the field. So I have to agree.
Was it difficult being married to a football hero?
Yeah. Just living with him when the game doesn't go well. That's the hard part. You're trying to switch and interview me. I don't want that. I want to interview you.
Okay.
What are some you think of DJs, radio DJs, and they've all got a certain characteristic or personality. Is it necessary, you mentioned Howard Cosell, well, there aren't any others of those, but is it necessary to develop a distinct characteristic or personality to come across well and be popular?
The key thing, Faith, is communication. We have to understand that there are people out there who are watching us, and we're just talking to them. We don't want to talk down to the public, and you're natural. You be yourself. You don't come on and be a different person in the broadcast booth than you were down on the field. I think that it used to be that broadcasters were all trained, and they had the deep voice and the wavy hair, and they came on and they could pronounce everything correctly. That age is long gone. Now it's people who can communicate and talk to the people, and I don't think there's a format. Youngsters like to come to me and say, Brent, how do I become a sports writer or a sportscaster? And I said, there's no format. But when you get your opportunity, just remember that you have to work harder then than you did trying to get it. Don't ever think that once somebody gives you a job that that's the end in itself. Then you work harder all the time. You know, you'll get your opportunity. There's no formula in this business. If you work hard enough and you want to do it, the break will come someday. And then just don't let it slip through your fingers.
Were you yourself active in sports at all when you were coming up?
I failed at everything. Listen, Lenny Lyles covered me 10 years from now. He could no speed at all.
But you were just fascinated by sports.
Oh, I've always enjoyed enjoyed athletics and athletes. I really have liked being around them. Even when you're down in the Baltimore Colts locker room and they lost a tough game to the Bears, I enjoyed the relationship.
What do you think about all the attacks on professional football players being a little brutal underneath it all in order to love the game so much?
Well,
Comment on that.
The violence is a part of football.
That's what the game is all about.
The appeal is there.
But like we were talking recently about, you like to hit, you like the
Faith,
contact.
it's a short-term objective. I mean, you're out there to do that. That's the name of the game. You can't go out there and just lean up against each other. And I think any athlete that's out there that doesn't like to hit, well, he's not going to be out there very long. So that's the objective at the time. But after you get off the field, you don't feel that way.
I'll bet you found that most football players were very mild-mannered off the field.
Most of the guys are.
And the rest of us are still frustrated. We go out on the expressway and start taking it out on the other drivers.
Sure, right. The one thing I want to ask, I am real pleased that you do such a fine job, because I can remember the time that Frank Gifford was doing some type of sportscast, and I'm not having against Frank, but I was chasing a guy, and he really said, look at the guy, he's outrunning Lenny. If he can't catch him, he said, gee, I never would have thought so. He really made me look kind of bad, and I talked to Frank about that later on, you know. So I want to tell you I'm pleased
He
that you
never
don't do
did
that sort of thing.
I never covered you, though, so you don't know.
All right, fine.
But do they take it personal when you do get carried away when you're covering something about the athletes?
Well, let me ask him this, though.
Sure.
But really, don't you think some sportscasters can make an athlete by, you know, if it's a tackle, he's constantly calling the guy's name. And I think if he
That's
kind of has, you know,
interesting.
I've seen that happen to guys.
One other
just by
thing,
putting him into the limelight all the time.
But-
Besides what he's talking about, give him a lot of publicity
Yeah.
in the game. If you work in New York City
Yes.
and the mass media is centered there, you automatically become a bigger name than if you play any place else in the country.
Yes,
Sam
that's
Huff
true.
is a perfect example of that.
Sure.
He was no better middle linebacker than Bill
Anybody
George and
else?
Joe Schmidt, but he had the New York media behind him,
That's
and that
true.
helped him greatly.
Yeah.
And
A lot of athletes talk about
just the opposite can happen. I mean, if you, as you say, can play it up when you do make a mistake, that sometimes actually is remembered a lot more by the fans.
That's right. I've seen it happen a lot of times.
Are some sports more difficult to cover than others?
Oh, yeah. Baseball is probably the hardest of all because it doesn't translate well into a television set. Too much dead time. So you have to be ready with a lot of anecdotes. And the guy who's watching a baseball game is going to have a guilty feeling about halfway through it. He said, gee, I should have been mowing the lawn or taking the garbage out. You know, it's not like a football game or a fight where you get yourself emotionally involved and the time just flies
forget.
past. So baseball is very difficult to broadcast.
What do
I
you
wouldn't
have
want
to
to do it.
you
Too many games.
Keep a collection of little stories to tell.
Yeah,
and
you write them down on index cards, you cheat, you take about 10 up there, and you flip through them.
Maybe I still have something left. You don't feel that. Because if I go back into the game, maybe I can do something spectacular and you can have me in your operation. You think maybe if I...
Could you come out and sprint for us? We're looking for some people who can run that 100, about 9-1.
I better stay
9-1.
where I am. I better stay where I am.
It's been great talking to you,
I've
Brent,
enjoyed it
and
very much, Faith.
having you
It's a
along,
pleasure.
Leonard, to
Thank
help
you.
me interview you.
Well, I didn't do much.
Oh, yes, you did. Brent Musburger, CBS Sports Spectacular Show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.